Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So, as always, Shop Talk is your opportunity to get in here, chat, and drive the show, mostly because we rarely have anything that we've planned ahead and are desperately hoping for chat to rescue us from our own laziness. So, speaking of us, welcome in Mike Christensen. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well, thanks. Good to see everybody.
Tracy and Mala could not be here tonight. They were both busy fighting off waves after wave of ninjas who were trying to capture them. So we do wish Tracy and Mala the best. Keep those ninjas in your mind. And I guess I'm not sure how that works. I mean, do we think about them like, oh, poor ninjas after Tracy and Mala wreck all of them, or do we just say, well, you get what you deserve. That's why you don't try to kidnap people. I'm not quite sure. Welcome in, Rednello. Glad to see you. So, in case this is your first time at Shop Talk, I'm usually not that irreverent. He lies. But the idea here is it's Monday. We're back in the swing of things for a work week. Let's kick back. Let's have a little bit of water cooler discussion and talk a little bit of shop about SQL Server, the data platform space, and whatever's on your mind. So if you have anything in chat, go ahead, drop it in. We take topics and drive them into the ground. So tonight, there are a couple of topics. One of them, hoping that Tracy could be here because actually it's her blog post that inspired this, where Tracy had a post not too long ago about storing SP Blitz Index results into tables between reboots. So the idea here being that a lot of this index information is stored at the level of, basically it's performance data that goes away between SQL Server instance restarts. And if you want to capture it, you better save it yourself because next time you restart that instance, it's gone. Same thing goes for a lot of dynamic management views, goes for weight stats, goes for many internal counters that are used in the SQL Server world. And even if you don't restart the instance, this data still tends to go away, especially the stuff that's captured on ring buffers, where, for example, CPU utilization, there is a dynamic management view that captures 256 minutes worth of CPU utilization, captures what the SQL Server process was, what other Windows system processes used, and gave you an idea of what your capacity, your free capacity in terms of utilization for a CPU is. But you get just over 4 hours of that data. If you want to go back 8 hours, either you captured it or you don't get it. So the blog post is pretty interesting. By the way, welcome in, Anthony. Good to see you. Glad you can make it. But Tracy's got a script here that helps us see here's the results of Blitz Index, and here's where we're going to store data, track it by the run dates, and be able to query that data over time and see how those recommendations can change. I wanted to drive that conversation a little bit further because Tracy's specific example covers the concept of Blitz Index, of index stats, which again derive from dynamic management views whose information restarts between SQL Server restarts. But there's a lot more that we can capture as well. Like, for example, who is active? That's another pretty common thing that we tend to want to capture. Session information, what activities are going on, utilization, how much CPU memory utilization have they had, how many reads have they done, get a rough picture of how expensive some of these queries are, if there's any blocking. And one of the nice things about SP who is active is that there is a built-in capacity to write it to a table. And if I go to the who is active repo, I'll drop a link in there for you. And that way, if you're one of the people who has not heard of SP who is active, definitely recommend, highly recommend. It is a wonderful way of seeing what is running on your SQL Server instance right now. And It is licensed as GPL v3, so let's welcome in Tracy. How you doing, Tracy?
All right. What's up with the
Good that you
camera?
were able to fight off all of those ninjas that we were talking about as the show started.
Which ninjas? The migraine ninjas?
Could be. I was going to say the ones that were causing you to have a black screen, like you were hiding, or that you had to clean up ninja debris.
Just the different web browser decided not to give it permission to have the camera.
That'll happen.
It's a closed laptop screen.
So, welcome in everybody, Tracy Baggiano. So, Tracy, we were actually talking about your blog post, the Blitz Index to a Table.
Good timing.
Almost excellent timing. 2 minutes earlier would have been excellent timing.
That's right. I lost track of time with my migraine, and my tinnitus driving me crazy.
We checked who is active, but you weren't there.
I mean, that seems legit. So, recapping it, basic story. I want to save data. That data's not persistent between restarts, and a couple of good ways to capture it. Tracy shows Blitz Index. Who is active? Drop the link in there. You're able to take the results and write them to disk as well. Seen several companies that do that. Even
you
companies
can use it for weight stats.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Tracking
That's
weight
my
stats
next
over
picture.
time.
But
That's
any DMV where things get reset with restarts and stuff. Yep.
yeah, and especially the things that you really care about.
Yeah, just the stuff you care about.
But this is the kind of thing where you may have a problem. Oh, the server failed. There's a problem with the server, and it wasn't memory dump, core dump, caused SQL Server to completely fall over on itself. More like there were some really bad processes running that took 9 hours, and all the stuff's done now. But why did it take 9 hours? What was the cause? And quite often, that information is gone by the time you start diagnosing. You start trying to troubleshoot, especially because someone has the brilliant idea that the server's running slow, so I'm going to restart it to speed things back up, which is doubly bad. It's bad because you lose a lot of this diagnostic information, but it's also bad because, well, when you restart the SQL Server instance, that buffer pool is now empty, which means that you don't pull pages from memory, you're pulling pages into memory first, which means that you're going to have an initial slower period than what you would otherwise have if the server were just running normally.
Can I ask a silly question? If I'm a big query writer and you guys restart the server, would my cache go away? Like if I have like cached plans?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Anything that's in a plan cache, anything that's in the buffer pool, those are all gone.
Wiped out.
And so that's
very naughty.
Yeah, I mean it's not like it's the end of the world or anything.
They come back, but like your long running process that was running, somebody's probably just going to kick it off and run it again that you just killed because it was making it slow, and then you didn't know what it was, so then you're just going to be stuck again, seeing it happen.
Yeah.
And then you're just like, let's just restart it again. I've had a boss do that.
Or
like,
you
restart
set,
like 5 times before you let me troubleshoot it.
You set the task scheduler to restart SQL Server every night.
True story. There's a server that I inherited one time that it literally dropped the buffer pool every morning, did something else, and then ran a checkpoint on master for some reason. But like every morning, in its job, the job title was fix memory. I'm not sure what it was fixing besides like clearing it out. Dropped the buffer pool, the plan cache, and then ran a checkpoint on master. What does that fix, Kevin? As far as memory goes,
I mean, it fixes it in the sense of fix Emmet.
there's nothing in there.
Yeah.
What was the point of the checkpoint, though?
Just to make sure.
Master.
Just to make sure.
This job may have recently disappeared and no one's noticed.
I would hope nobody noticed. Yeah, I got nothing for that. The best that I could imagine is that somebody thought, SQL Server had a memory leak problem and that they were going to fix the memory leak by clearing all the buffers out and then running a checkpoint because, you got to make sure that everything is totally cleared. So I'm going to run that checkpoint. It feels like misreading a couple of articles about performance testing where, between runs of things, you may clear out the cache, you may clear out the buffer pool to simulate a cold run.
Yeah. I'm looking. I'm going to look at it right now. Make sure I wasn't missing a step. It may be disabled on the server right now. Free system cache, free session cache, and then free proc cache, and then drop buffer pool.
Yeah, that feels like somebody was doing some stuff for performance testing and either left it on or thought that this actually helped.
It doesn't help. It's not performance testing if it says fix memory.
That's true. That's true. So
literally, what's it say? DBA_fix_clean_mem. Big letters to all caps. Like it's really important.
So you got to fix and clean the memory.
Yeah.
The movies, they rip everything out very fast. Does that work?
I think that's what the I don't know which one of these commands would be the clean part, but it runs checkpoint first.
Oh, okay. So now you're checkpointing just to make sure that everything's written, and then
in master, which where nothing's happening.
I mean, I would hope.
I can understand if like they were running against like maybe some of the big databases that are like terabytes.
No, that'd take too long. So checkpoint probably took too long there, so they just checkpointed master. That way, it's a lot faster to checkpoint this database.
I was just making sure, I read this by a few other smart people too, and they couldn't figure it out either. Why we were?
I got nothing. I mean, I'm trying to think what is the most charitable spin I can give to it, and the best that I could come up with is somebody had some sort of memory leak problem or thought they had a memory leak problem and thought that this would fix the problem and then just put it in place.
And then it may have seemed like it did and they never took it away.
Yeah, otherwise I got nothing.
Yeah.
It does not sound like a reasonable thing. That
2017 problem, evidently, March 2017. On 2014. SQL 2014. So it's possible.
Maybe.
Off topic. Never mind.
Oh, no. Do we technically have topics? I'm not sure. We have guidelines. We have guidelines that we rapidly ignore.
Well, Shop Talk is purposefully open-ended, right? So we can't mess it up.
I was one of the funniest. One of the things I seen, I was like, "What do you do to fix memory?" Oh, that's how you fix memory. Let's not do that. Let's see what happens if I disable that and see if anybody finds out.
Yeah, it is like going to Emmett's Fix-It to fix Emmett, which is that's still one of my favorite Simpsons bits, and that's got to be 20-something years old at this point.
I could see if they did something where they raised and lowered the max memory, so some system operating process needed memory during the middle of the night or something silly like that going on. But when I seen that, I was just like, that really does not serve a purpose besides making SQL do extra work.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. All right, if I were to think charitably, you have perhaps some long-running process that fills up your buffer pool with totally unrelated stuff, and then you drop it, but then you still have to refill it. So you've done yourself zero good and some harm by taking the time to clear out that memory or to mark it for replacement.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, no, that's got. I got nothing. I got nothing. And if Solomon were here, he would. Oh, Solomon may be here, and would, I'm sure, appreciate the Charles Bronson Simpsons reference.
One of my other favorite things I disabled recently was a SQL trace that runs for long-running queries. We
Okay.
had 6 years of data in there. And it was one of the top consuming queries on the server because nobody ever cleaned up any of the data and there was no indexing and it was just reading 6 years of trace files to import like the newest. And nobody was using it, I don't think, because no one's complained yet.
Probably, yeah. I mean, that's usually a fair indicator.
I just
This
disabled
does
it.
it does get to the point though that when you're storing data like DMV data, we talked about Blitz Index, or who is active data, which again generally quite often comes from DMVs. Much of it does. Or you're storing, wait stats, you're storing CPU utilization, you're storing extended events information that you've pulled from some system. It is still important to have some sort of cleanup process.
Mine had it built in, my blog post did. I only keep it 90 days, I think.
There you go. And
I had it built in there automatically. If it was 90 days old, it would get rid of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I made a note, you can change this here to whatever you like.
That is an important consideration when putting these together, because otherwise we get busy. We tend to forget about these things. The 6 years of trace data. Hey, when that started, it was useful enough. It was important enough. Got to get this thing in here. And this is cool. I've used it. And then you work on other projects, or you leave the company, and 6 years later, someone realizes that the single largest table in here is the trace table.
Well, when all the Hologram scripts first came out, there was not the purge job history or the purge backup history jobs in there. That was something he added on eventually because he seen a need for it, because no one was cleaning up their MSDB databases, because no one really knew those procedures existed to clean them up. And then you go and you throw them in, and you accidentally end up with MSDB's transaction logs that blow up and stuff. Because you delete, 10 years worth of backup data.
Right.
It happened at some places I know of. Not this current place yet. But the last place.
Fair enough.
So on that
quite a
topic,
few jobs recently.
If you do substantial cleanups like that, does that impact the query optimizer? Will it start making different decisions?
It can, yes, because there's less data in the indexes that it's using. So it can change whether it does a scan versus a seek and stuff, because it changes the statistics that are available afterwards.
Yeah, you can end up with different plans. They may be radically different. Like if Tracy's deleting 10 years of data and saving only 20 days, then a lot of the plans will be different, because the optimal plan for pulling a few rows from an extremely large table is going to be different than the optimal plan for pulling a few rows from a small table. If you're talking like get 20% of the data from a table, then typically a scan is going to be the most efficient versus 1/20,000th of a percent of the data. Okay, well, a scan is going to be radically inefficient, and the optimizer will try its best to seek and reduce that number as much as possible. So, sure, plans can change as a result of data size changes. Also, how much you care about the plan radically changes. If I have a 500-row table, to be honest, I don't care what the plan is. If it's just query a 500-row table, scan it, whatever. I'm not interested in optimizing that unless there's some pressing need. I query it 250 million times a day, or there's something special about that table that makes it important to worry about. Otherwise, no, it's 500 rows. Just query it, get what you need, be done. And as long as the queries finish in reasonable time, okay, that's fine. There's bigger fish to fry. That's my general philosophy. Again, specific instances can change that general philosophy. There are cases when, yes, I need to worry a lot about that 500-row table. But usually it'll be, I've got tables of 4 or 5 orders of magnitude larger that I'm working with, and I have to make sure that the queries against those tables are the best that I can make them. And that's where I'm going to get the most relative gain in performance, the biggest relative bang for the buck in terms of what I can do to make SQL Server run faster. In those cases, it's a lot about optimization, but also optimizing the human, and not focusing in on spending a lot of time on something that will improve performance by essentially just above 0.
Which is why the optimizer like gives up after a certain amount of effort, right? It's like this n factorial. We could do this all day, but like this one's good enough.
Yeah. There are many cases where you would never complete if you needed to enumerate every single plan. In practical terms, in real time, not literal infinite time. Okay, we're not dealing with a halting problem here. Oh yeah, Bronson, Missouri. Yes, that was a great thing. The airport there, and yeah. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, Mike, yes, there can be plan differences as you maintain those tables, but also there can be other benefits that come from it. Like backup times actually can shrink because, this 50 million row table that we really only needed 200,000 rows on because we just need the last 6 months of data and we've got an enormous amount, or whatever other extreme you come up with. If you're able to dump that much data, then many operations will end up being faster. Index rebuilds will be faster. You won't be locking the tables long if you're in standard edition. You won't be processing as much if you're in enterprise edition. Backups are faster. Stats updates are faster. CheckDB is faster. And those have positive knock-on effects because you're not going to have as much CPU utilization, and it will be for a shorter amount of time, which means that other processes won't be starved for CPU at certain times of the day. So big benefits over time from ensuring that you don't have this enormous bloat. Even if you rarely, if ever, query that table, even if the query performance isn't something you care about, there can still be benefits from maintaining that. And that's why when you're building out a solution to track information, one of the key items for any MVP is MVP, minimum viable product in this case, is getting rid of the data as well. That unless you need to collect it forever, you've got to find a way at the very least to shunt it off to some place where the storage implications are minimally relevant. So if that means go write it up to S3 or to Azure Blob Storage at the end of the month and pretend that you're going to look at it 10 years from now. Or if it's cases where I need to keep it for legal reasons, but that's it, go put it in there for forever, and when the lawyers come knocking, you can go pull it out of Blob Storage. But yeah, important to keep those sorts of things in mind. And one of the things that I did want to talk to you about, chat. What else? What other types of things do you normally build processes on, especially for administration, to store? What information are you regularly storing that isn't already available to you, or isn't available to you in a form that you like to have? So Tracy talked about Blitz Index. I threw in who is active. We talked a little bit about wait stats. What else? Are there other things that you're regularly querying? Take this data, store it locally for administrative purposes, and hang on to it for a while?
Not yet.
No?
I just got monitoring tools, so I'm waiting to see what I might be missing. I'm not used to having monitoring tools.
Yeah, that's fair. And hopefully your monitoring tools are doing the same thing where they're clearing out data after a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
I mean, I can start as chat thinks about it. One thing that I've been interested in is, and now I'm kind of responsible for a number of users. So the data science users, I'm kind of responsible for. So I check periodically that they're accessing the data. So because one of the things I want to implement is that if you're not using it, so like if you all have, I don't know how big your companies are. So we might have like 300 SQL users who can write queries, who can access different things. So it's kind of complex. Whereas in a smaller shop where I came from, there might have been less than 20 people who knew how to write SQL in the whole company. So I'm tasked with kind of one of the things I'm thinking is if use it or lose it kind of thing. Like if you're not using it and you said you're a researcher and you need to get health information and you're not using it, then I would preemptively take it away after a certain period of time, right? Or have a renewal yearly, like re-sign an agreement. So that's one thing I do in terms of monitoring users is kind of basic usage statistics.
Yeah, that is pretty valuable. And getting that idea of, are you actually querying this data? It does help with a potential security risk where the more people who have access to the data, the more of a practical security risk you're going to have. And that somebody who has access to this data doesn't really need it and ends up having their account compromised, an attacker could now figure out what sorts of access the attacker has access to and possibly connect to a SQL server and write some queries. So cutting that down. Yeah.
We place a lot of trust in folks because I found out, there's people who are statisticians that really they're good at SPSS or SAS, but they're not super technical in terms of IT stuff. Then we also have some people who are like, oh, I have a master's degree in computer science and then I'm going back to school for biostats. So those people know way more than I know. And so in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, you get the last day employee who's disgruntled and what could they do if they were allowed to? We give people a lot of trust. So yeah, it's something I think about. I don't think about it every single day, but we're mindful of, like, sadly have to think about worst case scenarios sometimes.
Sure. No, as a database administrator, your job is to protect the data. And so as a result, protecting the data can be just as much from internal people as from external threats and from systems that fail and from processes that write bad information. And so, and also protect it from, say, inaccessibility due to performance issues or due to some sort of disk corruption or hardware problems. So thinking through, what are the ways in which the data that I have in my care, entrusted to me, might possibly be compromised in some fashion, and trying to mitigate as many of those risks as is reasonable, because you can always mitigate more, but the question is, does it make sense to do further mitigation? And if so, toward what avenues? Like, one great way to mitigate risk is to prevent anybody from ever accessing the database. So just turn that server off and you will never have data access problems. But I'm not really a viable strategy for most places. And if that is a viable strategy for your place, you might find a different place, because it sounds like they may eventually realize that you're not doing anything. Like, if you can turn off that server and everything will just work just fine, and that's your server, and your job is to maintain that server. Just saying. So, worth thinking through some of those risks and internal risks. Do people have delete access? And it's not always doing it as a threat, as disgruntled employee, like in your scenario, Mike, but also, how often have we heard oops come from people where, oh, I forgot a where clause, or I was pretty sure I did that thing in development, not in production. Or where somebody comes to the database team and asks, hey, so when was our last backup? That's usually the beginning of a good story.
Or somebody
It's probably like
dropped
the SP
main
blitz
table.
backups procedure too.
Well, I had a real world example that actually Kevin was nice to help me with. So I have that exact issue, right? So I have people that I have over 110 users. I would say like 75, maybe 75 regular users, and they're pretty savvy. And they have some, like an asthma study had a million patients. So the labs for a million patients for maybe a 5-10 year period is massive amount of data. So they're trying to handle longer lists, which our studio and your local memory is not really great at. So I don't want to create a temporary table. I don't want to do SQLite, and I don't want to do. I don't want them creating tables. That's too dangerous, because somebody could. This is like a production system that we allow researchers to touch in a shunted way. So we're trying to figure out. Your suggestion was this JSON to a stored procedure, which I really like. So yeah, it was the easiest solution, and I was like, we could just do this. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, we can't have 75 people making tables. No way.
Yeah. Especially when the power to create is usually also the power to destroy.
Well, when I started learning JavaScript, I say started because I never really finished. And I realized that I've been coddled with SQL, because SQL will generally kind of tell you what you're doing wrong, generally speaking. JavaScript's like, oh, you just hosed your entire computer because you have no idea what you're doing. It just still gives you an answer. I'm like, oh no.
But it'll say everything was fine.
Yeah, it will, or give you the wrong answer and you think it's right. That was where I was like, okay, I gotta be really careful with JavaScript. It's like 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 3. That seems right. That's what the program says.
Yeah, or 11, or not a number, or yeah. That's. I mean, we can always rag on JavaScript. This is a place where we're fine ragging on JavaScript. For it being the assembler language of the web, boy, could they have picked a worse assembler language for the web? Maybe, but it's hard to imagine. But anyhow, so other things that we store, I think it's going to primarily on the administration side be what we're talking about here, and also, as you're cleaning things up, do remember, like Tracy was talking about, backup history or job history. SSIS-DB stores its own history, and, well, you may not automatically be cleaning that up either. Replication usually takes care of itself if it works. So if replication's working, it's usually going to take care of its own messes. That won't be a big issue. But every once in a while, it's useful to check out what's in master, what's in MSDB, see what those largest tables are, and get a feeling for, does that need to be that large? I have 25 million records in backup history. Does that seem reasonable? If you have an enormous number of databases and you take backups every minute, you probably get up to that number pretty fast. But the question is, how long do you need that history in there? And especially when 25 million rows in backup history can seriously affect job performance. And that's where it may even be worth it if you really do need that backup history, because let's say you do take log backups every minute for hundreds of databases on a single instance, and you need 3 years of data because reasons. And you have all those backups somewhere. I mean, you could store them in a different table for your reasons why you need hundreds of backups, log backups every minute for several years. Mike, I'm gonna ban you from chat. I'm gonna
Sorry.
ban you from this show for saying that TLA. This is an internal revenue free zone.
Sorry.
I swear all those deductions are for business purposes.
Well, I keep a lot of record. I mean, so I've gotten to be. I used to do auditing, right? And I work with the FDA, and I think I used to be really conservative about that. And then I was reading, you only need 5 to 7 years of your taxes, and I had like 15 years of taxes, and it's like I just don't need this. Like as I've gotten, I wouldn't say older, maybe more experienced. Maybe that's a better word.
There you go.
I don't keep everything, like I just don't need it. And we were doing that at work, and I was getting pushy, and people were being supportive of me because I was like, these projects are from 2017, 2018. We have copies of them. Let's get rid of them. Like, let's get rid of them in terms of what's the opposite of S3 storage. So S3 is like more affordable. So if you're in the live production database, what do you call that?
Expensive. Where you get your very expensive all flash array. Premium.
Yeah. Right. So we have tons of data like that shouldn't be there, right? And we're stewards of the company as well, right? So like, because we're getting pressure on kind of our Oracle costs, and so why not? We can prune.
Yeah. Same thing happens with paper. So at my first major job, about, let's say 2010, somewhere around there, there was a wave of retirements, and I took over. I upgraded my cube to a different cube, and the person who was there retired. She had been working for the agency for quite a while, and there was desk drawers filled with documents from the mid to late 90s. It's like these things are 15 to 20 years old, and even if they were relevant in the mid to late 90s, they're not relevant now. People tend to be pack rats. It's, well, I better keep this just in case, because sometimes just in case is important. And we started off the show with, I better keep my DMV data just in case. So it's not attacking the principle. It's, I think, being pragmatic in terms of what data we need, how long it is reasonable to keep it, and then if we still think that there is value to get from it. I joked about log backups from 3 years ago. Yeah, you probably don't need that. But if for some reason you did actually need that information, long-term longitudinal study and backup performance, you're writing a paper for an academic journal. I don't know. But in that case, yeah, you could store it as is. You could store aggregated versions of this, daily amounts, daily lookups, write the original data off into glacial storage in S3 or the blob storage, the cold tier, where it's really cheap to write to it, really cheap to hold it, and kind of expensive to pull it back. But it's cheaper if you're willing to wait 12 hours to pull it back. So, right. That's a case where now instead of 2 cents per gigabyte, it's half a cent per gigabyte, but I have to wait 12 hours to get the data. And if I do need it for that, then I only query the data once a year or something, or these are old backups that we absolutely need for business integrity. Maybe there are legal reasons why we need to keep these backups. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff you shunt off to glacial storage. And if the lawyers come and say, we need this data, great, give me 12 hours, we'll get it out for you. Because usually the lawyers don't come in with, we need this data because we're going to court in 6 hours, so get it together. Right. Hopefully not, because if so, you might need better lawyers. Just saying.
Those are S3 lawyers.
So, the Lindy effect. I'm gonna have to look at that real quick, sneak a peek of it, and then pretend like I knew all along what the Lindy effect was. Ah,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
no,
smart.
that
Yeah,
is,
that's smart.
yeah. The longer you haven't needed the data, the less likely you are to need it in the future. Quite often, yeah, and that is interesting that this is that people have this concept of almost the reverse, that oh, I haven't needed this yet for 20 years, but tomorrow might just be the day. And I say this as a person who regularly complains about the lack of data that I have available to me, especially historical data. So again, it's not a general principle, go delete all of your data unless somebody can prove that you need it right now. It's more of have a solid understanding of what the purposes are, and if you do need it, find the
Archive
right place
strategy.
for it.
Yeah.
What's that?
Put in an archive. Have an archive strategy. Have an archive database or something. You
Yeah,
don't always have
archival.
to have it on the live system that you're querying every
This is true.
day. So
This is
for
true.
business data.
Archival databases, basically ETL processes to move the data over, storing it in files for analytical purposes. This is one of the benefits to the data lake experience, where
Mhm.
for that transactional data, use your relational databases that have really cool hardware underneath them. For the known business problems, data warehousing, Kimball style warehousing works really well. And data lakes, where you can put data and hope that somebody will use it in the future. Now, the problem that I tend to experience is company comes with an idea. We would like to perform an analysis on X, where X is maybe what is our churn rate, or what factors contribute to churn rate. And churn rate's a really interesting problem. If you're able to reduce churn for a company, that's a lot of money that can be saved. But the problem with understanding churn is that you are, by definition, looking at customers who have left you already. And if you clean up all the data after the company has left, you no longer have that historical information of what did things look like for your customer before they left. And so you're not able to learn, what were the circumstances at the time that they were churning out. All you have is maybe a snapshot at the very end of what the last record information was. So not knowing that history, not knowing that flow, can affect your capacity to understand what were the key factors that led them to this decision. And so you end up with post hoc analysis of, let me understand survivor effects. Like, well, our survivors currently look like this, and the people who have churned out at one point in time looked like that. But you don't have a really good comparison of, well, what did our survivors look like at that time? Not unless you're storing that data separately. But back to this point, in many cases, that's the type of information that maybe you don't need to store in that relational system, which says that to understand the problem, you may need to collect data for years before you can answer the question. And it's sort of like Douglas Adams and building a planet to create a supercomputer that can ask the question whose answer is 42. And so we need to go build this planet-sized supercomputer in order to solve the question, or to figure out what the question is. And it almost feels like that sometimes on the analytics side, where I need to, oh, you've asked me a really great question. Come back to me in 4 years after I've built the processes to start extracting that data, collect the data, manage the data, maintain the data, and can analyze enough of the data at the level to understand if I have come up with the right solution to the problem. That's kind of the opposite side of this coin, where the magazine hoarders among us, the people who have data collection issues, we'll say, that have collected, like the people who save candy bar wrappers because, hey, you never know. You never know when you need that candy bar wrapper. The data equivalent of that. That person at least is going to have the data. Now, the problem will be
How do you apply
how do you actually find the data from within that enormous mess?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a different problem. I guess we're just going to have all kinds of problems. That's my philosophy on life.
Well,
Life is just a whole bunch of problems.
One challenge I've had in the business side doing data and analytics stuff is the business becomes obsessed with keeping data. So, we had, let's say, in a pharmaceutical company, we had Siebel, and then we were building out Salesforce, and we had a homegrown system before that, and they wanted to keep porting all this data. So we might have had a patient that was taking medication and since 1997 when the company started. And it's like, I was not the decision maker, but I was trying to influence people. We were holding up our implementation of these new data because we couldn't map it all correctly, or and people were just obsessed. We want the data all the way back to 1997. I was like, well, it's 2012. You are not going to use that data, and what that data isn't necessarily relevant because we don't even have the same execution strategies we do now. Like, we have 2 new drugs, our competitors are different, so the decisions that were made to start therapy or not start therapy are much different than they were then anyway. And they didn't listen, and then we delayed it, and then we had a horrible situation where we had each of our operators had Siebel and then Salesforce and 2 computers open at the same time. But
yeah,
that's part of I guess our business hats is like, how do we convince the business what you're asking for is unreasonable. It's just going to add costs, and you're not going to use that data because we do your data analytics for you. We never use data from 1997.
Yeah, that is a concern. And from the standpoint of the business side person, they're not doing the work, so the level of effort is entirely conceptual to them, and there's no, I guess I would use the metaphor skin in the game for this case, where you're not really doing much. You're just saying, yes, go ahead, I need all of the data. And telling you to save all the data actually is less effort for me than trying to figure out what is it that I actually need.
Right. They read the Harvard Business Review, which says data is your number one asset, and then they just never want to let go of any of it.
Yeah. And, again, there can be cases where that information from 97 might be useful. Maybe. But unless you've got a pretty solid use now, that does hurt the likelihood that data is going to be useful. I can think of in prescription cases, if you have, for example, major adverse reactions to particular drugs, that if you had it in 1997, you're probably still going to have it in 2022.
Right.
And so in that case, just having that information that, oh yeah, you almost died because we gave you penicillin. Probably if we give you penicillin, it's not going to turn out too much differently. It's not going to be great this time.
Right.
So little bits of differences, but again, that can also be something that is thought through on an individual basis, and thinking is hard, so we don't do it. So just save it all or delete it all, whatever. And on that dour note, we're going to talk about something that's a lot less dour. So Mike was mentioning before the show a tool for text generation called Nimble Text. And I'm going to drop the link in here in chat. No sponsorship here or anything. It's just, this sounded like a pretty interesting tool. So you want to tell us a little bit about it, Mike?
Yes, absolutely. So I was doing some repetitive tasks. So let's say you have a case expression that you like case when, this, case when this, case when this. And depending on the project, I've seen projects from other, it's not code that I wrote necessarily, where there might be 100 of these things. And the reason being is that this is like a cross institution, and in the RX, there are these harmonized things for codes, and some of they get implemented differently at Duke versus Vanderbilt versus Stanford hospital system. So they might have these very complex case expressions to try to catch all the use cases, right? Like case where this happened or that happened. So I was doing some cleanup, speaking of cleanup and data cleanup, and I had to write like all these delete statements, like delete from this table where this is true. And I was playing around with CTEs and deletes. And then I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I went on Scott Hanselman's blog because he has like he sometimes does a review of like tools that he uses. And one tool that he used is called Everything, which is like a neat tool where you can kind of like search you can kind of like index your entire computer and search things the way you should be able to search for things. So anyway, he had talked about this nimble text thing, which really helped with regular expressions and repetitive stuff. So essentially, it's a tool whereby like the example I'll give is I put in like 25 objects. I put in 25 tables, let's say. Then in the little panel, I said, I want to say delete from my schema dot all these things, like 25 things, where project ID equals Mike's project, and then I hit calculate, and then it writes all the SQL, right? It writes all that text. It's kind of like formulaic. Now we can do that in Excel, right? Like, so I could copy and paste it and do it in Excel. This would seem to be a lot cleaner. It seems like there's a lot of use case for it. It is a free tool. I don't work for them or anything. But there's just advanced features if you buy it for a few bucks. But anyway, I thought it was pretty neat because I don't use a lot of the Redgate. We don't have a lot of paid for tools, and I do use snippets, and I do use text expander to like for any repetitive tasks. I have some tools for that. But this is really neat, and it saved me a ton of time. So I just wanted to throw it out there.
Fair enough. And it looks like if you do want the paid version, it is an entire $20. So
my goodness. That's expensive.
Well, the other so a similar tool is called Nimble Set. And Nimble Set is maybe overkill for us because we all do SQL, but it's really neat because it is maybe the same developer, you have a left list and a right list, and you might, if you're not a SQL person, you'd be like kind of like conceptually like what is in this set and what's not in this set. So I'm actually going to tell my statisticians about it, because what will happen is they'll get a list of 1 million patients, and then they have another static data set, and they're like, are any of these patients in that? And this tool, without using SQL, you can be like, which one is in list one but not in this, or which is in both, but it's a GUI. So it's good for, I have different levels of clients. So if you're a master's degree student and R, but you don't know SQL, you don't use Excel a lot, because they really discourage the use of that in science now. Then you can use a tool like this. You can kind of quickly do some of these tasks instead of doing a VLOOKUP or use other generic tools for it. So,
right. So set differences and text management a little bit. I think I saw a little bit of regular expression related work, but yeah, basically ways to simplify some repetitive text operations. Seems like a useful tool. We'll probably check out the free version. Might pay for the full version if it's a legitimate business expense that I use for legitimate business as a legitimate businessman.
Of course, everything legitimate with Kevin.
I mean, I am on the up and up. And it's not awk. I have a book. On SED and awk somewhere in my house that I keep threatening to read. And it's from 1991 or so. But that's okay, because has awk really changed in the last 20-something years? 30-something years? No, not really. it's there. It works. It does its thing. And I really do want to read it because awk is really powerful. It's just the few times that I've used it, I've come out scratching my head and wondering how in the world did this get to that result? And outside of the simplified demo examples, like when you look at real statements doing powerful text operations using awk, you look at the results and you're like, how did I get from here to there? And or how did this person get from here to there? Because if I make one minor change, everything's totally different and broken. Little bit of a.
I'm sorry. In the tutorial, it says awk is simple to use, so you are incorrect. It says it right here. It says the guy who invented it.
Right. I mean, in contrast to
Vim is easy to use. What do you like? What's the problem?
I've got few problems with Vim. My biggest problem with VI is actually my biggest problem with VI is when I get raw VI without Vim, and I start trying to do things that I can do in Vim, and it's like completely failing on me. And then I realize that I've got to do this the old way. I have to use J, K, L, and I to move around instead of the arrow keys because it's VI.
M means move, right?
Improved. VI improved.
VI, and then M means you can move around.
Huh.
Data jokes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was going to go with improved without an I.
Yes, that's probably what it is.
So I guess that would be improved, but
I made a decision. I'm doing VS Code. And everything I can do with it, I'm doing it. I started doing SQL with it, so I'm proud of myself.
I am.
VS Code's cool.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty much a daily convert to that. I use Visual Studio in one environment, in one place, and it's VS Code everywhere else. And really, I use Visual Studio because I've been using Visual Studio there for a decade. So everything's set up to work with Visual Studio. Everything where I'm coming in new, it's VS Code. I don't even have Visual Studio installed on this desktop, where I do a lot of development. Nope, just VS Code, because that does the job. It's not perfect. Actually, I have noticed with the F# extension that once a code base grows to a certain size, it seems to have some problems. But, it works. It does the job. And
I knew you was going to work F# into this conversation.
Kind of my job. Being a paid member of the F# committee for the promotion of F#. By the way, if there is such a committee and you would like to pay me, talk to me afterwards. I would take that money. So doing a few sessions at Azure AI, the Azure AI conference. Yes. So I'll be there in December. Ike Ellis and I are doing a pre-con on data engineering in Azure. And then I've got a session on working effectively with legacy SQL. I'm going to rebuild that talk, especially because, ironically, the last time I gave that talk, I think it was SQL Server 2017. So the irony there is, well, there's some legacy SQL in there now. So be rebuilding that talk. I'm giving a talk on building a multivariate anomaly detection engine using Python, which is a section of the book, which is forthcoming one of these days. I am in the midst of editing all the chapters. Got 15 of them completed, 4 chapters yet to edit. So hopefully, I know book's coming out in Q4. The question is just when in Q4. But then there's a third session that I am doing on Spark streaming, which I'd given once, and I gave it mostly as a running Spark on premises and doing Spark streaming over that. I'm going to rebuild it as doing this in Databricks. Now that
Cool.
Spark streaming in Databricks is, I think it's a lot easier than it was even a year ago. So, going to try that out. Got a lot to do there, but that's all happening in December. So, come on, October. So I will be panicking and desperately trying to put all these talks together. I mean, no,
Yep.
I will have them completely built and ready to go by then, I'm sure.
Yep.
And definitely not
That way
building
you
it the
can
night
enjoy the
before.
holidays. Yep.
Ah.
And past Summit and all that stuff.
Yeah, although I will not be going to Past Summit. It's the same week as Live 360, and I'm presenting at Live 360 on the Wednesday. So I would be at Live 360 Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So technically I could fly to Seattle Wednesday night, be there Thursday and Friday, and then fly back from Seattle. But given how bad airlines have become, I don't even want to take that risk, because if I try to
but I won't
fly
be
out
on your flight, so it'll be fine.
Oh, no. Over the past year, I've had 5 extreme experiences on airplanes where extreme
See,
experience.
it wasn't my fault.
No, not your fault. Extreme experience means either I had to drive or be driven, or stay in a hotel room overnight, or book alternative flights because my flight had been canceled. 5 separate times in the last year.
This on me.
None of them had
His
Tracy
flights
on
were
the flight.
delayed. He always blamed it on me.
Well, I mean, that's because you were on the flights that were delayed. And
See,
I rarely had flights. So prior to 2020, I rarely had flights that were delayed, except when Tracy was flying with me.
It was not my fault. I had plenty of flights delayed when you weren't on there, so that had nothing to do with me.
Wait, no, that still is you. You're the common factor.
No. I successfully made it out to Seattle and back without a delayed flight. Only bad thing that happened was being TSA'd.
I mean,
you just reminded me. I got to sign up for a global flight.
Yeah, that's enough of a bad thing.
Pre-check gets you nothing. I was nice. I let a disabled person go in front of me. I let a whole flight crew go in front of me. Just don't be nice to people.
I'm just doing it for Canada because we got to go back and forth to Canada a bunch.
It doesn't buy you anything. You still might get TSA.
No,
you can go through the line faster, but you still might get TSA.
When we went from Vancouver back here, oh boy, it was almost 3 hours to come back to the U.S.
Yeah, you get through faster. You still might get TSA though. Just saying.
Yeah, there's still benefits.
There's still benefits. Definitely do it. You'll get through faster.
No. People, don't do TSA pre-check. Please continue standing in the other line so that I can go into the pre-check line and have a short line.
Might do it. Everybody else don't do it.
It looks like you know Kevin Faisal. Do you know anything about his taxes?
Right.
It's weird. I was like, no, sir. I don't know anything about his taxes.
All right, so we're going to close on this note from Solomon. Always liked awk. It has come in handy a few times, especially because there's a DOS port of it. Yeah, I have used awk to positive effect in the past, and sometimes I use it. It's like, oh, that's cool. I'm able to understand what it's doing. Other times, I found a case that works. I pasted it in. I thought I understood it. I tried to replicate it. It completely failed, and I said, I'm just going to take the thing that I pasted and just live with that. But one of these days, I'll read the book. Then I will know awk better. But in the meantime, until I learn awk better, we are going to say that's probably it for tonight. We have hit our 7 o'clock Eastern window, and time to wrap things up. So remember, tomorrow, Jared Poche is talking about query optimization. Every millisecond counts. And you can tell them all about the mean things that I said about how query performance only matters when there's a business problem. But then next Tuesday, so tomorrow, Jared, next Tuesday, August 23rd, Armando Lacerda is going to talk to us about the Lakehouse serverless SQL pool and Power BI. So we're going to have quite a bit to cover over the next couple of weeks. Hope to see you here. And regardless, till we see each other again, everybody, take care.